Welcome. I am currently in the United Kingdom and have the honor of interviewing Damian Collins, a member of the British Parliament, a well-known British politician and a friend of Boris Johnson. He was one of the first British leaders to declare a full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine. Welcome, Damian.
Thank you.
Thank you for your agreeing to participate in my program openly. I represent Ukrainian media of Ivano-Frankivsk region. Damian, you was one of the first politicians in Britain who declared about Putin's crimes. What was your first opinion when you heard about the bombs flew into our cities?
Well, that's right. I think Vladimir Putin and Russia have been a hostile foreign state for many years now. Obviously, they invaded Ukraine in 2014, maintained and supported an illegal occupation of Crimea and parts of the eastern parts of your country. And as well as that, engaged in disruptive strategies and techniques in politics across Europe and around the world as well. A lot of my work in Parliament has been looking at Russian disinformation campaigns in different countries. Often actually the invasion of Ukraine in 2014 was really the start of that work, and analysing the way Russia works around the world. And also, I also chair the all-party group in the House of Commons for media freedom, and I was involved in a debate looking at what we would sort of call lawcraft, which is Russian oligarchs using the legal system in the UK to intimidate journalists like Catherine Belton, who wrote a very good book called Putin's People, looking in detail at the way Russia worked in the UK and the way oligarchs used their money and power. So I was familiar with a lot of these issues. To be honest with you, I think in the build-up to what looked like it would be a new war, I think we were all shocked at the extent to which Russia was prepared to break international law, that it launched a full-on invasion and really attempt to take over the whole of the Ukraine. And it is because of the bravery of the Ukrainian people that has been stopped.
What was your opinion about Russia before this invasion, before 24th of February?
Well, I think Russia acts in a hostile manner. It acts to protect its own interests. It acts in a way that it treats former Soviet countries as really part of Russia. We've seen those invasions in the Ukraine and in Georgia. We saw this cyber attack on Estonia. And I think you can see why the Baltic states in particular have been so keen to join NATO, because I think if they weren't members of NATO, we would have probably seen Russian incursions into those countries as well. But I think we've all been shocked by the extent and the horror of the invasion of Ukraine this year. This goes well beyond anything Russia had attempted in the past, and I think has rightly shocked the world, and we all condemn it.
Now a lot of Russian people in Europe have some pressure from Europeans because they still support Putin's regime. How Britain feels about it? How Britons feel about the people, the Russian people who still live here?
Well, there have been obviously sanctions applied to people that we think are close to the Putin regime. I mean, the most public being Roman Abramovich, which has required the sale of Chelsea Football Club, which he owned and which he won't profit from, and seizing a lot of his assets here in the UK. A number of Russians have been sanctioned and have had their assets seized in the UK. So that applies to people that are close to the Putin regime, and they've paid a price for Putin's actions. But I think we're also really clear that our opponent here is Putin and his supporters within Russia. It's not the Russian people. The Russian people are in their own way victims of the oppressive regime that Putin runs in his country. And so our target is really aiding Ukraine in its own defence and implying sanctions on those people who are close to the Russian regime, particularly Russian oligarchs who have money and property in the UK, and to deny them access to the UK legal system and other UK professional services that they've used in the past.
We are all of us read Russian media and they say that it's possible for Russia to throw a nuclear bomb on Britain. Do you believe in that?
I can't believe that Putin would use nuclear weapons. Certainly not, the sort of big missiles that are used to attack other countries. I don't even think he would use battlefield nuclear weapons, but that is a more likely prospect. They would use them strategically in war. But I think nuclear war is so unthinkable, and of course the retaliations that would occur for any countries using nuclear weapons are such that it is unthinkable. So I think even a madman like Putin, I think, wouldn't use nuclear weapons. He would have to understand that that is something that the Western countries could not ignore, and it would lead to a huge loss of life.
How do you think it's possible of Third World War?
Well, I mean, I think what we've shown is that actually the alliances that we've built up, can be effective. Certainly, I think it's prevented Russian military operations directed at the NATO member states, but of course Ukraine is outside of NATO, so we're in a situation where we can support Ukraine in its fight against Russia, particularly by supplying and equipping the Ukrainian armed forces, which of course go way beyond the professional army, but probably include millions of people who are at arms currently fighting as volunteer soldiers to protect their country. And I think Britain has played a very active role in making sure that the military supplies get through, that the right equipment is there. I think the British-made N-law rocket launchers have been a highly effective battlefield weapon, but I think Ukraine now needs more sophisticated weaponry to meet the current Russian threat in the east. And so I think that is what we can do. But I think we want to see this conflict resolved as quickly as possible. But unfortunately, it looks at the moment like Russia is prepared to conduct a lengthy and highly destructive war.
Damian, you are influential politician in UK. You are a member of parliament here. What activities do you do to support Ukraine and Ukrainians?
Well, I mean, a lot of what my office team have been doing since the war started is working, with people who are trying to accommodate Ukrainian citizens to live in the UK, with Ukrainian nationals who are applying for the not just the paperwork they need to come to the UK, but also to identify host families and people who will accommodate them in the UK. So my team have been doing a lot of work trying to help with that process, which can be a bit slower than we want, but trying to make sure that people are supported through that process. We've been, I support the government's work in providing aid and assistance and military aid and assistance to Ukraine, and these are really, really important things. And as I said earlier on, one of my areas I've taken a strong interest in over the years has been looking at Russian disinformation networks, the way Russia seeks to lie about what it's doing, to discredit and attack other people through media, particularly online media. And I've worked quite closely in the past with academics like Peter Pomerantsev and Nida Jankovic, who've done a lot of studies looking at the way Russian influence operations have worked in the Ukraine over many years.
Actually, your government sent a lot of financial help and technical help. Do you know how much money you sent us in total?
I couldn't give you that figure off the top of my head, but I mean, I think that the contribution in terms of direct financial aid, but also the value of British military equipment that has been supplied to Ukraine is very considerable. And of course, that started before the war started. And I think this was really significant that Britain and other Western countries were already working with the Ukrainian government to plan for exactly this sort of event, that if the Russians did invade, what sort of equipment would Ukraine need to be able to resist that attack. And so things like the N-law rocket launchers had already been supplied before the war started, and therefore could be used straight away. But of course, at the moment, the important thing is we keep those supplies coming through, and that countries like Britain and America, other big European countries, are doing all they can to provide as much military assistance we can to the Ukraine government.
We are very grateful to you, but you take this amount of money from the state budget, yes? And what about ordinary Britons? Don't they worry about that fact that you you help so much Ukrainians, and maybe it somehow influence on their pockets.
Well, at the moment, the government is providing this this support. It is considerable, and I think we should also consider that when the war is over, Ukraine will need a lot of help to rebuild the devastated areas of its country, to get its economy going again, and that will require, I think, Western assistance as well. This is after the Second World War. We had to provide assistance for the reconstruction of Europe, so I think that will be there. I think the British people understand that supporting Ukraine in its fight against Russia is important for the whole world and important for people here too. But in some ways, the greater pressure the war has caused, I would say, the moment is probably less the costs of supplying and supporting Ukraine directly, but the wider consequences of the war, which is something that is starting to affect everybody. The high energy prices people are paying at the moment, as we move away, certainly as Europe moves away from Russian oil, the impact on food prices, which is very significant. We've still not been able to get Ukrainian grain out of Ukraine from last summer's harvest. At best, the Ukrainian government believes it will produce about 65% of a normal harvest, and there are difficulties in getting that grain out. The Russians have been targeting agricultural land, laying it in mines, and so these are problems that affect the whole world, and the consequences in the UK of the disruption to food supplies and also high fertilizer and potash prices will probably be higher food prices. But there are other parts of the world where those countries may not be able to afford to pay those high prices, or may not even be able to get access to the food they need at all. And certainly in Africa, there's growing concern that the consequences of Russia's war in Ukraine are being felt directly and over a much wider area.
Britain launched the program Home for Ukrainians. Do you know how many Britons are ready to settle Ukrainians in their houses?
Well, it's a good question.
In your district?
In my district, I mean, certainly hundreds, in this district.
This area,
absolutely. And we've seen increasing numbers coming through. It's been a tremendous effort from people locally, coming forward to offer their homes, to provide homes for Ukraine. If anything, the amount of support and the desire of people to help was initially greater than we could complete the necessary checks to allow people to come in. And it's the scheme. So I think the scheme has worked very well in terms of it's meeting a need that's there. But if anything, the desire to help has been greater than the speed of being able to bring people across. But it's really important that with Homes for Ukrainians in the UK, that we make sure that proper checks are done, that people are placed in appropriate accommodation, that checks are done on people that are offering the support as well as the people who are coming over. So the scheme is starting to deliver in more and more places, but certainly in this area, hundreds of people have been accommodated.
Really, I have met here a lot of people, a lot of Britons, and all of them want to help Ukrainians and very worried about our situation.
Yes, so. Absolutely. I think people were truly shocked by what they saw on the news and the impact that it has. I have friends who have Ukrainian parents, and getting their parents out of Kiev, was a great concern to them at the start, in the early phase of the war, which they've managed to do. But of course, even with the prospect of coming to the UK, if you were living in Kiev at the start of the war, getting out of the country was quite hard. Getting out safely was very hard.
Sometimes we say that everything is more visible. You can take coffee,
That's
please. Please. Sometimes we say everything is more visible from the side. What can you say about work of our government, our president? Maybe you know something that they made wrong and they act in some wrong way.
Well, I think we've seen a pretty strong international effort to support Ukraine. I think we should be proud of the fact that the UK government was was already involved and one of the first to respond. I think the American government has as well. I think actually as the war has gone on, we've seen much bigger response from Europe, from the rest of the European Union, in particular from Germany as well, which had historically been very reluctant to get directly involved in conflict areas involving Russia. The fact that countries like Finland and Sweden have now applied to join NATO, I think shows that actually the response has not only been a response all across Europe, but that the war has turned Europe even further away from Russia, and the fact that there are now active plans to look at stopping Russian oil being exported into Europe. It's reopened the debate again around creating more energy independence for the rest of Europe from Russia. These are all the consequences of what has happened, and I think for Russia too, they will see that they will not only be defeated militarily in Ukraine, but they've been defeated diplomatically as well. This will poison their relations with the rest of the world, particularly with Europe and the United States, and the NATO countries, and has seen a decisive turning away from countries on Russia's border, away from Russia as well. So I think these are all significant, and I think the feeling I know in the UK Parliament and government is very strong that whatever the outcome of this war in the end, Putin should not be seen to have gained anything from it. And certainly I think the place of Russians in the UK, certainly Russian business people who've previously enjoyed a very free life in the UK and have used UK institutions to protect their assets, they've now seen those opportunities switched off.
Talking about your government, yes. For example, your Prime Minister Boris Johnson are very respectful in Ukraine. We respect him so much, and he became our national favorite and a real friend of Ukraine. We love him. And but why there is a lot of Britons that want to replace him in his chair as Prime Minister?
Yes, well, that's got nothing to do with his support for Ukraine in the war. I mean, that his support for Ukraine has been wholehearted. I was in the House of Commons when President Zelensky addressed the House remotely from.
I read about it in your article. You wrote about.
That's right. Yeah, it was very moving, and there was terrific support for him in Parliament when he spoke. Look, in politics, leaders have good times and bad times, and Prime Minister's had a difficult period as a consequence, particularly of the investigations into the use of Downing Street during the pandemic, and he's had to account for that and answer questions for that. He was tested this week with a vote of confidence from the Conservative MPs. I supported him, as did the majority of the parliamentary party, but certainly work has to be done to rebuild some trust that has been lost over some of these issues. But the concerns that have been raised about his leadership in the UK have nothing at all to do with his support for Ukraine, which is absolutely solid and is supported by the British people.
As I understand you correctly, you vote for him.
I did, yes.
Yeah. Okay. So I noticed that a lot of Britons set up flags near Ukrainian flags near their houses.
Yes.
What about you? Do you have Ukrainian flag near your house?
We don't have a Ukrainian flag up at the moment. We've got plenty of Ukrainian badges and other things that we wear a lot. I'm not wearing it today actually, but I also changed my Twitter profile so that I have a picture I took on Romney Marsh earlier in the year of the yellow flowers of the oilseed rape in the fields and under a very blue sky, so it looks like the Ukrainian flag. So I've used that on that picture on all my messages I use on Twitter.
Yeah, thank you. Do you believe in our victory?
I do believe in your victory, and I think your victory, is a victory for for free peoples that want to choose their own destiny. And I was very annoyed at the start of the war when some people suggested that Russia had somehow been provoked into invading Ukraine because Ukraine wanted to become potentially a member of the EU in the future, wanted to look more to the rest of continental Europe, and that should be the choice of the Ukrainian people to make those decisions, and that we should respect Ukraine as a sovereign country and a sovereign people. And so it's not only a question of supporting Ukraine in its struggle for national independence and to end what's an increasingly brutal Russian invasion of that country, but these are struggles that are shared by free peoples all around the world, and therefore a defeat for Ukraine will be a defeat for democracy and for free people all over the world, and that's why we must do all we can to make sure that doesn't happen.
Have you ever been in Ukraine?
I have. Some time ago though, I visited Kiev twice for business reasons. That was in 2004, so quite a few years ago now. But
do you like this city?
Kiev was when I was there, I thought it was a very beautiful city. I was only sorry that in my 2 visits there, I got to enjoy the city, but I didn't get to see much more of the country. I've always wanted to go and visit Crimea, which is probably now a lot harder, which I hear is very beautiful. And I've always been intrigued to go and visit Lvov because it's a very interesting historic city that has been over the years part of many different sort of empires and and nations, but is again, I've heard reports, a very beautiful city, so it's somewhere I hope to visit one day.
It's a culture capital of Ukraine.
Yeah.
I live not far from
Okay.
you. So how do you think, when will this horror end?
Well, I mean, that's that ultimately will depend on Russia. I think, in terms of how long Russia can sustain the war, and the good thing is that the attempt to take the Kiev, the Ukrainian capital, and Kharkiv, those attempts have failed. But clearly, there's an ongoing war in the east. And the concern I have, I think many people here will have, is whether Russia is prepared to support the sorts of conflicts that it has been involved with in Syria and previously in Chechnya, which you end up with very long, drawn out, almost street by street struggles. But I think the losses being borne by the Russians, both financially and in terms of direct losses to their armed forces, have been very significant. And Ukraine has a determined people and determined armed forces that's prepared to do all it can to resist them. So we all hope that Russia will recognise that it can't gain the objectives that it wants there, and some of the counter-offensives to Ukraine have operated against Russia appear to have been successful as well. So, we all hope that this could be resolved before the winter. But unfortunately, at the moment, this is Russia's war. They're the one who are promoting it and sustaining it, and Ukraine is doing a fantastic job in resisting it. But we will be there for as long as Ukraine needs us. But ultimately, the war will stop when Russia stops.
In Ukraine, all of citizens of Ukraine wish Putin to die as soon as possible. Really.
I can understand that, given the impact that his brutal actions have had on the whole country. I can thoroughly understand that.
Yeah. So here I met a lot of people that very support Ukraine, very good, kind people, and I suppose you are one of them.
Yes.
And I wish you to come again to peaceful Ukraine, and thank you for your support, and thank you for this conversation.
Thank you. It's been great talking to you about this, and I look forward to visiting Ukraine in happier times.
So you can call me, write me,
Exactly.
I can show you everything. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.